Greetings all guys, this is Nick. How are you all? It's been a little while since I made a video. It's been a bit of a hectic week for me, but I thought I'd finally have a sit down over this weekend and have a bit of a chat to you guys. I thought now would be a good time to start a different kind of video series on this channel. One where we just have a bit of a chat about a few things. Talk about things at a bit more of a theoretical level, if things on this channel weren't already theoretical enough. No lists, no visuals or anything like that, just you and me having a bit of a chat. And I want to talk about these things here, these little lumps of plastic. Now, when I started making this channel, I didn't realize these things were the source of so much debate, but after all the feedback I've got from various people, I mean, that's basically how I make videos for this channel. I just get feedback and I make videos on it. And a few people have reacted in a certain way when I'm discussing odds on dice, rolling dice, how they affect the game, how they affect your list building. And it seems like dice in general is a very big point of salt for a lot of people. And it really got me thinking about my attitude towards dice, our attitude towards dice as general as players. And I actually think it's worth sitting down and having a discussion. I want to start out this video by stating this one simple fact because it really helps you guys get in tune with what I'm talking about here. Dice roll randomly. You have no better or worse odds of getting, say, on your red dice, hits or misses. There is no such thing as luck beyond it being a simple human construct. It's basically you roll the dice and you will randomly be assigned hits or misses. You are no more likely to get more or less hits, misses, evades, whatever on a game. Nobody is more lucky than the next person. Now, if you heard me say that and your first response, your gut instinct is, no, Nick, I am terminally unlucky. The dice are against me. I hate dice in X-Wing. They ruin the game for me. I always lose because of the dice. This video is for you because I want to tell you that that's not the case. And yes, even you, person watching this video, you are no more unlucky or lucky than the next person. The reason I want to have this chat is because we talk a lot about list building and various ways of, I don't know, getting better at the game we play, if getting better is sort of the prerogative we're going for here on this channel. And I think it's actually worth having a chat about this. A while back when I started playing X-Wing, I read this really good blog article by a group called the Lothal Runenrs, who are a competitive group of X-Wingers here in Melbourne. Actually, guys, I play against quite regularly. And they had an article on their site called Climbing the Wall. I'll actually link that down in the comments below. And that was all about sort of how you go from being a beginner to being not a pro player, but somebody that sort of learns to adapt and gets better and better and better. It's that first hurdle you get over, which takes you from being a newbie to a X-Wing player, I guess if you want to say. And a huge part of that article was talking about dice salt. Trying to, I guess, mend these fundamental attitudes, these fundamental negative attitudes we have towards dice rolling. And at the time, I didn't really understand why those two things were connected. Why we talk about being a better X-Wing player and talking about something that's just to do with luck. And I think that really comes down to my own psyche. I am a very mathematical-minded person. I understand fully when we have dice, everything is completely random. The odds of rolling a hit on this D8 is 3 in 8 because there are 3 out of the 8 faces. Crits 1 in 8, focus 2 in 8, blank is 2 in 8 as well. And I also have a bit more of an understanding about human psychology in general. I've never studied psychology, but it's something that's always fascinated me. And I think that's what I really want to talk about in this video. Understanding why we think these negative things and understanding what these negative things are, what these thoughts are, which basically get in our own way and why we think these things. Basically, I've narrowed this down to 2 things. 2 thoughts that really get in the way as players from us getting better at the game of X-Wing. And that is 1, the idea that dice rolling is a bad thing in X-Wing. It's something that should not be in the game. And 2, I myself as a person that plays X-Wing am generally unlucky as a dice roller. And these are 2 very fundamental things that particularly new players fall into a bit of a trap in thinking. And it basically comes down to human psychology. We as humans are evolved to be adaptive, to be the dominant species, and we get into a lot of different patterns, a lot of different traits that sort of come along with that. We are very adept at detecting patterns. It basically makes us good at surviving. It means we can adapt to different situations. We know if we touch this spiky thing, it will hurt us. If we touch fire, it will burn us. If we do this, we do that. We become more comfortable. We survive better. Part of being an animal that adapts well, part of being an apex predator in particular, is learning patterns, learning how to adapt. And we particularly remember patterns that elicit some kind of emotional response. And that is no truer when it comes to gaming. We live in the first world. I'm Australian. Most of you guys are American. We don't really deal with a lot of really awful things happening to us on a day-to-day basis. So we tend to blow out our basic problems as first world people out of proportion somewhat. And we elicit emotional responses to things that don't really need a big emotional response. But one of those things is when we do particularly well or particularly badly when we're playing our games. And it's very easy to sort of pin that on dice rolling. I mean, it directly correlates with our experience as a gamer. You roll more hits, you do better. You roll less hits, you do worse. And both of those things tend to elicit some kind of response. What particularly sticks out in our memory as humans is negative responses. We tend to try and avoid things that are negative. And when we keep playing a game and we have those red dice rolls where we just whiff and we get no hits, or particularly on green dice, it usually it leads in sort of the game losses where we need to roll just 1 of 8 off our 4 green dice and we completely blank out and we just feel terrible about that. But those particular events really stick in our mind. And we tend to exaggerate the frequency when we reflect on our games of how often these kind of things happen. It only takes, say, 1 or 2 really bad rolls for us to reflect on a game and think that we just rolled really poorly the entire game, because we don't think about the rolls that we did well or just did average, because they don't stick in our mind. It's not the pattern that we tend to detect. We tend to remember those really emotional responses of, oh, I completely whiffed out and my dice were terrible, therefore my dice were terrible the whole game. And it's actually interesting. People that sort of say, oh, I rolled really badly that game, more often than not, if you were to actually film that game and actually do the math and all the dice results, you're probably not rolling any higher or lower than average. It just happened to be at those times. It happened to be at those crucial times in the game that caused you to have this emotional response. Now, before we go on, yes, there are games that are won and lost on dice rolls, particularly very close games. But people that say I'm generally unlucky in dice rolling overall, and they think they rolled unluckily over an entire tournament, that mathematically is almost impossible to, even across, say, a 3-game tournament, to roll badly across all 3 games. So yes, it's important to point out that yes, maybe 1 or 2 games here and there can be affected occasionally by dice rolling, but you as a player do not trend on good or bad rolling. It just doesn't happen. The fact that we're rolling something over and over again that's random, the odds will even out over time. And that's an important thing to remember. We tend to detect these patterns, we have these emotional responses, and that makes it stick in our mind. Another common human trait, and this is again harkening back to the whole us being the dominant species, we tend to see ourselves as very important, very in control of our situation. We as people don't like to be too self-critical. And that tends to lead us to blame shift. The average person does this. It takes a lot of self-control, a lot of introspection to be properly self-critical to the point where we don't blame shift at all. I'm sure I do it in my everyday life here and there. It's a way to alleviate frustration, to alleviate stress. It's always easier to say, this bad thing happened to me because of this outside source. It's easier to say that than say, no, I'm the one that screwed up. And it's no different with dice rolling. we don't tend to want to be self-critical of the game that we play, or the way that we play it rather. We tend to blame the easiest thing, and the easiest thing is the thing that is completely random. Obviously, when you do whiff out on one of your rolls, it's so easy to use that as a linchpin as saying, this is the thing that lost me the game. And far too often, that one bad roll, well, in general, as I said, the more you roll, the more the odds tend to even out. It's very unlikely that rolling tends to lose you games. Even in games where your luck, per se, or your rolling is just a bit below average, even that, it's very unlikely to be the main thing that lost you that game. More often than not, the things that lose us games comes down to how we strategize, how we fly our ships or move our models, or what order of cards we play if we're playing a trading card game. This principle very much applies to all games. And I think what's the most telling about this thing is people that tend to blame the dice tend to be those people that really struggle to get over this initial hump when they started playing X-Wing. It's very hard for them to move to that stage of being properly self-critical, where they improve on every single game. Every time they fly certain ships, they get better and better and better. I like to think that's the kind of stage I'm at. I like to be very self-critical for these reasons. And when you see, that throng of X-Wing players in the game shop talk to each other after a tournament, what I notice is those people tend to be the most self-critical. None of them talk about their dice rolling, unless there was a really close game, maybe one-off. But whenever I have a chat to, so for example, I go down to a shop locally, and there's always these 3 or 4 players that do quite well. They play the game a lot. It's to be expected when you sort of invest as much time as they do. And whenever I have a chat to them after the game, they're always talking about, oh yeah, I think I could have done that. Maybe you could have done that there. My list maybe doesn't match up well to your list because you have this element which really plays around with this element, and to sort of beat that, I have to do this or you have to do that, or all that kind of stuff. And that's really good. The people that are willing to self-evaluate and even offer advice to other people. I always find as well, and this is telling of how cool the X-Wing community is, people that do quite well are often very willing to offer advice to newer players, or even to players just a bit less skilled than they are in general. And I just find that whole experience very telling. The fact that we have this random element in the game of X-Wing, and when you boil down to it, when you look at the best players, you really see how they tend to focus on strategizing and list building, all that kind of stuff. And the random element is just something that just exists in the game, and it's not something that really is in the forefront of their mind. In fact, let's talk about that now. Because I mentioned earlier, one of these negative thoughts we tend to have as players is that dice rolling in the game of X-Wing is in general a bad thing. And dice rolling in X-Wing is a very important thing. In fact, this can be applied to Destiny, Legion, whatever. I'm using the example of X-Wing in this video, but when we're talking about dice rolling, we can pretty much apply it to any one of these games. Dice rolling adds a random element to the game of X-Wing. X-Wing is a game that has a certain amount of moving parts, a certain amount of complexity, and it needs a certain amount of choice input from its players. But that amount of input and the amount of moving parts that the game present does not offer us enough in terms of varied gameplay that would result in significantly different results when matching up certain game elements, say certain lists. Now, I'm sorry if that sounded very confusing, but that's basically the simplest way I could put it. Basically, you need enough moving parts for a game to have enough varied gameplay based purely on the input of its players. In a game like X-Wing, where it has relative simplicity, I'm not saying it's the most simplest game out there, but it's simpler than a lot of tabletop games. It's simpler compared to a lot of, say, card games or just board games in general. And because of that, we need to introduce a random element into the game to give it a bit of uniqueness, to make sure not every game plays out the same. In the case of X-Wing, it's dice. In the case of, say, trading card games like Magic the Gathering, you shuffle your deck at the start of the game and you draw your cards from the top at random. This is the random element which is used in trading card games. And pretty much all tabletop games uses one of these. The only one that doesn't, that springs to mind immediately, is chess. And chess, purely from a game design point of view, is a fantastically fascinating game. I don't know if I've made it clear enough to you guys yet, but I love game design. It's one of the reasons I kind of pick X-Wing apart as much as I do. And chess is a brilliantly conceived game because it has enough moving parts, enough moving elements within the game, enough uniqueness between those elements, and enough choice of the players that you do not need to introduce random elements into that game at all. There's no dice, there's no drawing of cards, there's no flip a coin, there's nothing in chess that is random. You see every game element your opponent has, your opponent sees every game element you have. It's just a case of that player input creating enough unique outcomes that a game of chess does not require random elements. In the game of X-Wing, if you did not have dice, if you just suffered the amount of damage on your ships due to the primary weapon value of your opponent minus your agility of your ship, say for example, and you flew certain lists against each other, you'd find that certain lists would always be favoured in certain matchups. It's just how it is. The meta would be even more narrow than it is now. Not that the meta is narrow at the moment, it's doing quite well. But without that random element, you really risk everything falling into place so neatly that certain lists just dominate so hard. There's not enough uniqueness or complexity in the game of X-Wing to not incorporate a random element, such as dice rolling. And pure and simple, that's why we have it. It means that certain players can adapt to certain situations. They can use the odds of the dice in their favour to kind of pick and choose how they should play out certain things. It means even in bad situations, X-Wing player have outs, so to speak. Even if they have to do things which don't offer very good odds, there are those things that you can do. You are not just doomed to lose the game in certain matchups. There are certainly matchups where things are much harder, I'll grant you that. But nowhere near as bad as they would be if we didn't have the random element of dice rolling in the game of X-Wing. And I think it's really important to remember that. Dice rolling also offers us something very interesting in the way we build lists, because we play certain cards that affect the odds on dice rolling, affect the certain odds on getting certain results, or how effectively ships evade or hit, or all that kind of stuff. There's a reason that one of the most powerful, highly costed cards in the game is Emperor Palpatine. It's a card that fundamentally changes the results on dice. Even in its errated form, it's still super powerful because you get to play around with the odds of all the dice that you roll, which is just a fantastic ability to have in the game of X-Wing. And it's important to remember that. And when you really sort of understand from a design point why we have these things in X-Wing, why they've been implemented, how they've been implemented, and how we can sort of play around with the odds, it can really help you as a player. It can help you learn how to better fly, how to better design lists, how to better read the board state, how to sort of evaluate odds. It's something I particularly love. I've done dice rolling tests on certain cards on my channel before. I want to do more of them because I find this kind of thing fascinating. And I guess the way I want to close off this video is just say this is somewhat one of those things that really gets me going in the game of X-Wing. I have a super mathematical, logical mind, and I find this stuff very accessible, but I understand that some people don't. I encourage people that don't see eye to eye to me with dice, don't understand the importance of them, don't understand the relevance, think they're against them or whatever, to have a think about the things I've said in this video and really take these things to heart, because this is actually really important if you want to become a good player at X-Wing. Now guys, in the comment section below, tell me if you like this style of video. I will do more if you do. I won't if you don't. But I do want to do some more chats on dice in X-Wing, particularly different ways to modify your dice, different ways to assess situations, and just look at the odds in general, because it's something I find fascinating. And I think it's something that you guys enjoy as well. It's a very fundamental part of the game of X-Wing. It's a very interesting part of the game of X-Wing, and it definitely warrants a lot of discussion. But in the meantime, guys, thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and I will catch you later.